Eleanor glided through the cavernous marble foyer, her silk robe whispering against the polished stone. Sunlight, filtered through towering arched windows, painted stripes across the pristine floor, illuminating dust motes dancing in the silent air. The sprawling mansion, a monument to unbridled wealth, was her gilded prison. Every exquisite detail, from the antique tapestries adorning the walls to the priceless sculptures gracing pedestals, screamed luxury, yet a profound emptiness echoed within its opulent confines. This was the golden cage, and Eleanor, with her seemingly perfect life, was its most prized and most miserable inhabitant. Her husband, Richard, a titan of the tech world, ruled not just his empire but also their home with an iron fist disguised in velvet. He was a man of sharp intellect, undeniable charisma, and a cruel streak that manifested in subtle, insidious ways. His words, often delivered with a condescending smirk, were his preferred weapons, aimed squarely at Eleanor's spirit. He had built his fortune on innovation, on seeing possibilities where others saw only obstacles, yet he saw nothing but inadequacy in his wife. Still wandering aimlessly, Eleanor? Richard's voice cut through the morning quiet, sharp and dismissive, as he descended the grand staircase, his custom-tailored suit impeccable, his eyes already scanning the headlines on his tablet. He barely glanced at her, his attention reserved for the world he dominated. "One would think with all the time on your hands, you might find a hobby that actually contributes something. Perhaps organizing my sock drawer? Though I suspect even that might prove too complex for your particular talents." A familiar ache tightened in Eleanor's chest, a dull throb that had become a constant companion over their decade-long marriage. She offered a faint, practiced smile, a mask she wore with weary expertise. "Good morning, Richard. I was just admiring the light." He scoffed, a sound devoid of humor. "Admiring light? How utterly profound. Do you ever feel, my dear, that your existence is merely decorative, a very expensive, albeit ornamental, accessory to my life?" He paused at the bottom of the stairs, finally looking at her, his gaze sweeping over her with a critical, almost bored assessment. "You know, sometimes I wonder what you even do all day. The staff handles everything. You have no career, no discernible interests beyond interior decorators and charity galas, which, let's be honest, you're only invited to because you're my wife. It's truly astonishing how utterly useless a person can become when handed everything on a silver platter." Eleanor's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of something deeper, something Richard was too blind to see. He always saw the surface, the beautiful, placid woman he had married, never the churning depths beneath. He never saw the girl who had devoured books on astrophysics, who had sketched intricate architectural designs in her youth, who possessed a mind sharper and more analytical than he could ever comprehend. Her past, her true self, had been carefully buried the moment she stepped into his world, deemed incompatible with the role of a billionaire's wife. Her talents, once vibrant and promising, had been deemed impractical and unbecoming by Richard, slowly suffocated under layers of his disdain. She remembered a time, long before Richard, when her ambition had burned bright, a fierce, quiet fire. She had dreams, audacious and unconventional. But Richard, with his crushing superiority and endless stream of belittling remarks, had systematically extinguished that flame, leaving behind only embers that glowed faintly, almost imperceptibly, in the darkest corners of her being. Later that week, the embers would ignite. The annual gala for the Richard Thorne Foundation was in full swing, a glittering affair packed with investors, politicians, and socialites. Eleanor, resplendent in a sapphire gown, moved through the crowd, offering polite smiles and engaging in superficial conversations. Richard, holding court near the main stage, was in his element, basking in the glow of his own perceived brilliance. A junior associate, a nervous young woman named Chloe, approached Eleanor, her face flushed with anxiety. "Mrs. Thorne, I'm so sorry to bother you, but Mr. Thorne is about to give his speech. And he specifically asked for the donor list from the last quarter. My tablet just crashed, and I can't access it. I know he keeps a backup on his personal drive, but I don't have the password." Eleanor, despite her inner turmoil, always maintained an outward composure. "It's quite all right, Chloe. I believe I know where he keeps a printed copy in his study. I'll fetch it." She navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the mansion, her heels clicking softly on the polished wood. Richard's study, a sanctum of power and secrets, was usually off-limits, but the urgency in Chloe's voice had overridden her usual hesitation. She found the heavy mahogany door ajar, a sliver of light escaping. Pushing it open, she saw Richard, not on the main stage, but laughing conspiratorially with a group of powerful men, a half-empty champagne flute in his hand. "And then," Richard boomed, his voice carrying clearly from the study's alcove, "my dear Eleanor, bless her heart, tried to offer some input on the new investment strategy. Can you imagine? I had to gently remind her that her expertise extends primarily to choosing between beige and off-white drapery. Honestly, she couldn't manage a lemonade stand, let alone a multi-billion-dollar portfolio. A beautiful ornament, nothing more. Utterly without practical use." The men chuckled, their laughter echoing through the room, sharp and cruel. It wasn't the first time Eleanor had overheard such remarks, but this time, something snapped. The words, delivered with such casual contempt, felt like a physical blow. Her face remained impassive, her grip tightening on the doorknob, but inside, a cold, hard resolve began to crystallize. The humiliation, the years of quiet suffering, the systematic dismantling of her self-worth, it all coalesced into a singular, unwavering decision. She backed away silently, her footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rug. She didn't fetch the list. Instead, she walked with purpose, not back to the gala, but to her private sitting room, her mind already racing, calculating. The decorative accessory, the useless wife, the beautiful ornament. She would show them all. That night, Eleanor, the woman Richard dismissed as incapable of managing a lemonade stand, decided to dismantle his empire, piece by meticulous piece. The quiet, simmering fire within her had finally erupted into a controlled, burning inferno. What was Eleanor truly capable of, and what exactly had she been hiding all these years beneath that placid surface? The world, and especially Richard, was about to find out. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The cold, hard resolve that had crystallized within Eleanor that night solidified into an unyielding determination. The polished veneer of the useless wife remained, but beneath it, a meticulous architect was already at work. Her first, most crucial step involved discretion. Every action, every inquiry had to be undetectable, leaving no trace that could possibly lead back to her. She began by subtly shifting her internet searches, camouflaging her true intent amidst queries about art history, high-end fashion, and exotic travel destinations, interests Richard would expect. Yet, buried within these innocuous searches were highly specific terms: corporate dissolution strategies, hostile takeover legal precedents, offshore asset protection loopholes, and forensic accounting firms. Her mind, once ridiculed and suppressed, now hummed with a renewed, almost exhilarating clarity. Flashbacks, vivid and sharp, began to surface. Memories from a life before Richard, a life where her intellect was not merely decorative but a finely honed instrument. She saw herself as a young woman, barely out of university, poring over complex financial models, her dormitory room cluttered with textbooks on macroeconomics and investment banking. Her professors had seen a prodigy, a natural talent for dissecting intricate systems and identifying their vulnerabilities. She had interned at a prestigious investment firm, not as a socialite's daughter seeking a resume filler, but as an eager student absorbing every nuance of the global markets. That ambition, however, had been deemed unfeminine and unattractive by her traditional family, gently nudged aside for the more suitable path of marriage to a wealthy, powerful man. Richard, in his arrogance, had seen her as a blank slate, easily molded into his ideal accessory, never realizing the depth of the dormant brilliance he was so carelessly dismissing. He, meanwhile, continued his relentless campaign of disdain, utterly oblivious to the quiet storm brewing beneath his gilded roof. His remarks grew sharper, his contempt more pronounced. "Eleanor, darling, did you remember to approve the catering for the foundation dinner?" he would ask with a sigh, as if the task were beyond her comprehension. "Try not to confuse the canapés with the main course this time, won't you? We wouldn't want to make a spectacle." Each barbed comment, instead of wounding her, now served only to fuel her resolve, hardening the steel within her. He saw her silence as acquiescence, her placid expression as simple-mindedness. He never once considered it the calm before a devastating tsunami. Eleanor understood that she could not operate alone. Her secret network began with a single cautious step. She reconnected with an old university friend, Clara, now a successful corporate lawyer specializing in complex financial litigation. Their reunion, ostensibly for a gossip session over high tea, was a masterclass in subtle information gathering. Eleanor, feigning concern about a fictitious friend's marital woes, probed Clara about divorce laws, asset protection, and the intricacies of corporate structures. Clara, unsuspecting, offered invaluable insights, unknowingly laying the groundwork for Richard's eventual downfall. Later, she expanded this network, carefully choosing individuals whose expertise she needed, framing her inquiries as abstract hypotheticals or concerns for mutual acquaintances. There was the retired forensic accountant, a family friend from her youth, whom she approached under the guise of wanting to understand investment portfolios better for her charitable endeavors. And the discreet private investigator, recommended by a trusted art dealer, whom she hired for genealogical research, a plausible cover for deep dives into corporate holdings and personal histories. One rainy afternoon, while Richard was away on a business trip, Eleanor ventured into his study, the very room where his cruel words had ignited her rebellion. She wasn't searching for the donor list this time. Her target was a specific antique globe that sat prominently on his desk, a gift from his father. She remembered him once joking about how his father had hidden treasures in plain sight. Her fingers traced the worn brass meridian, then hesitantly twisted a small, almost invisible knob near the base. With a soft click, a section of the globe's equatorial band rotated, revealing a tiny, velvet-lined compartment. Inside lay a single, aged, leather-bound ledger and a tarnished silver key. The ledger, filled with meticulous handwriting, detailed transactions stretching back decades, far predating Richard's current empire. It wasn't a formal business record, but a personal diary of sorts, chronicling shadowy investments, shell companies, and illicit dealings that skirted the very edge of legality, sometimes crossing it with brazen impunity. Richard's father, it seemed, had built his initial fortune on foundations far murkier than the official narrative suggested. But it was the silver key that truly piqued Eleanor's interest. It was intricately fashioned, unlike any she had ever seen. Attached to it was a small, faded tag with a single cryptic inscription: "The Vault, Sierra del Toro." A cold certainty settled over Eleanor. This wasn't just a simple ledger, it was a coded message, a hidden document revealing a crucial piece of information. The Sierra del Toro was not a mountain range, but the name of a remote, privately owned data center in a tax haven known for its impenetrable security and anonymous holdings. Richard, always so quick to dismiss her as useless, had inadvertently handed her the key to his deepest, darkest secrets. This wasn't merely a vulnerability in his empire. It was the very bedrock upon which his entire, meticulously constructed facade rested. Eleanor, the quiet, observant wife, had just discovered the Achilles heel of the formidable Richard Thorne. The game had truly begun. Eleanor, now armed with the ledger and the cryptic key, felt a surge of exhilaration commingle with a deeper, more unsettling sense of dread. The sheer scale of Richard's father's illicit dealings, meticulously detailed in the aged book, was staggering. It wasn't just minor infractions. These were systemic, calculated manipulations of markets, tax evasion on an industrial scale, and outright fraud, all hidden behind a labyrinthine network of shell corporations and offshore accounts. The ledger served as a chilling blueprint, exposing the morally bankrupt foundation upon which the Thorne Empire had been built, a foundation Richard had not only inherited but actively expanded upon. Every entry was a thread, waiting to be pulled, threatening to unravel the entire tapestry of their fabricated success. Her task shifted from mere investigation to meticulous evidence gathering. Each night, after Richard had retired to his study, oblivious in his self-importance, Eleanor would descend into her own clandestine world. She photographed every page of the ledger, cross-referencing names and dates with publicly available financial records, news archives, and corporate filings. Her sharp intellect, once confined to dissecting academic theories, now devoured complex financial statements, identifying discrepancies and patterns that would escape a less astute observer. She discovered a series of suspiciously timed investments, sudden surges in stock prices preceding major regulatory announcements, and a pattern of asset transfers to obscure entities just before quarterly reports. These were not coincidences. They were the fingerprints of systemic corruption. Her useless social connections, once a source of Richard's derision, now became invaluable tools. She attended charity galas, art auctions, and exclusive luncheon clubs, not for pleasure, but for purpose. With a practiced smile and an air of detached elegance, she navigated conversations, subtly extracting information from the very individuals Richard had cultivated. A casual remark from a junior senator about an upcoming environmental bill revealed a crucial detail about a land deal Richard had recently finalized. A whispered complaint from a disgruntled CEO at a private club about unfair competition provided a lead on a monopolistic practice Richard's company was employing. Eleanor, the quiet listener, absorbed it all, piecing together the puzzle with an almost surgical precision. Her seemingly innocent questions, always framed with a touch of charming naivety, disarmed her interlocutors, who saw only a wealthy socialite, not a meticulous architect of their downfall. The emotional toll of this dual life was immense. By day, she was the devoted, slightly vacuous wife, tolerating Richard's condescension with a serene smile. By night, she was a relentless strategist, poring over documents, her mind racing with complex calculations and legal implications. The constant charade was exhausting, a suffocating cloak of pretense. There were moments of profound loneliness, when the weight of her secret felt crushing, and the temptation to simply give up and return to her gilded cage was almost overwhelming. Yet, each time Richard uttered another dismissive remark, each time his arrogance flared, her resolve rekindled, burning brighter than before. She remembered the fire in her belly from her university days, the thrill of intellectual challenge, and knew she could not go back. This was her fight, and she would see it through. One afternoon, a heart-stopping moment threatened to unravel everything. Eleanor was in her hidden study, a small soundproofed room she had quietly commissioned during one of Richard's extended business trips, disguised as a meditation space. She was deep into analyzing a complex web of transactions linked to the Sierra del Toro data center, when the distinct sound of Richard's car pulling into the driveway echoed through the house. He was not due back for another 2 days. Panic flared, a cold knot in her stomach. She scrambled to shut down her encrypted laptop, sweep away the printed documents, and replace the innocent-looking meditation cushions. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she heard his heavy footsteps approaching her door. "Eleanor, are you in here?" Richard's voice, laced with an unusual edge of suspicion, cut through the silence. He tried the door handle. It was locked. She had installed a discreet, magnetic lock that could only be opened from the inside with a specific sequence. "What are you doing in there, darling? Meditating, are we? Don't tell me you found enlightenment without me." His tone was mocking, but beneath it, she detected a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even suspicion. "Oh, Richard, you're back early," she called out, forcing a bright, airy tone into her voice. "Yes, just a little quiet time. I was just about to come find you." She quickly pressed the sequence, unlocking the door, and emerged, her face composed, a faint, almost imperceptible flush on her cheeks. She was dressed in a flowy silk caftan, a book of poetry artfully placed on a nearby table. Richard's eyes narrowed, scanning the room, then landing on her. "You look flushed," he observed, his gaze lingering. "Is everything all right?" "Perfectly, darling. Just a particularly intense session. You know how it is. Sometimes the mind needs to wander to truly find its center." She offered him a dazzling, practiced smile, one he had seen countless times. He grunted, seemingly satisfied, and turned to walk away, but not before his eyes darted back to the floor, where a minuscule, almost invisible shred of paper, a fragment of a printed financial statement, lay nestled against the base of a potted plant. Eleanor's breath hitched. Richard paused, then, with a dismissive shrug, continued on his way, apparently not noticing the tiny clue. Eleanor waited until his footsteps faded before collapsing onto a cushion, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. It had been too close. This near discovery only sharpened her resolve, channeling her suppressed creativity and intelligence into her plan with renewed vigor. She understood now that she needed to be even more careful, more precise. The Sierra del Toro key became her focus. She couldn't simply walk into a highly secure data center. She needed a way to access its contents remotely, or to compromise its integrity from the outside. Her research delved into cybersecurity, data encryption, and the dark web, areas far removed from the society pages Richard expected her to frequent. She began to learn about vulnerabilities, backdoors, and the art of digital infiltration. Eleanor, the woman deemed useless, was quietly becoming a formidable force, a silent architect constructing not a grand edifice, but a meticulously planned demolition. The question now was not if she would use this information, but how she would deploy it without exposing herself, how she would trigger the chain reaction that would bring Richard's empire crashing down, all while maintaining her innocent facade. The next phase required a surgical strike, a precise application of pressure that would begin to unravel the threads of his carefully woven deception. Eleanor, now acutely aware of the razor-thin margins separating success from catastrophic exposure, refined her focus. The Sierra del Toro data center, a seemingly impregnable fortress of Richard's digital empire, became her primary target. It was the nerve center, holding the most damning evidence of his illicit dealings, the very bedrock upon which his dishonest fortune rested. However, a direct assault was out of the question. Her strategy shifted from brute force to elegant subversion, a series of calculated nudges designed to destabilize, rather than outright destroy, in a single blow. She would target a specific, vulnerable aspect of Richard's business, one that, when triggered, would create a domino effect. Her research had revealed a crucial detail. Richard's company relied heavily on a single proprietary software for its global supply chain management. This software, developed in-house, was notoriously complex, and more importantly, had a critical, undocumented dependency on a legacy server housed within the Sierra del Toro facility. Richard, in his infinite arrogance and desire to cut costs, had resisted upgrading this system, deeming it too expensive and unnecessary. Eleanor saw not a flaw, but an opportunity. She initiated a series of strategic moves, disguised as unrelated events, carefully designed to exploit this weakness. Her first step involved subtly influencing a key industry analyst, a man known for his meticulous, if somewhat pedantic, reports on global logistics. Through one of her trustworthy contacts, a former colleague from her pre-Richard life who now worked in financial journalism, Eleanor planted a seed of doubt about the stability of certain proprietary systems within the tech sector, hinting at potential vulnerabilities in heavily customized, single-source solutions. The analyst, intrigued by the seemingly innocuous tip, began to dig. Richard, meanwhile, dismissed early warning signs with characteristic disdain. A minor glitch in the supply chain, causing a one-day delay in a shipment of high-end components, was attributed to a lazy vendor. A sudden, inexplicable increase in server load at the Sierra del Toro facility, flagged by his IT department, was brushed off as a phantom error or maintenance oversight. He saw these as isolated incidents, minor setbacks in the grand scheme of his unassailable empire, certainly nothing to concern himself with. His focus remained on his next big acquisition, his mind consumed by the thrill of the chase, completely oblivious to the quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. As Eleanor continued to weave her intricate web, she found an unlikely ally in a man named Adrian Vance. Adrian was a brilliant, albeit eccentric, cybersecurity expert who had once worked for Richard's company before being unceremoniously fired for questioning Richard's ethical standards. Eleanor had encountered Adrian at a discreet industry conference, initially drawn to his sharp, critical observations about corporate security. Unlike the sycophants who surrounded Richard, Adrian possessed an uncompromising integrity and a keen intellect that immediately recognized Eleanor's true potential, seeing beyond the veneer of the billionaire's wife. He saw the sharp mind, the determined glint in her eyes, and the quiet fire that burned beneath her elegant composure. Their initial conversations were cautious, veiled in generalities. Eleanor spoke of exploring investment opportunities in secure data solutions, while Adrian spoke of the fragility of centralized systems. Slowly, a mutual trust began to form, built on shared disillusionment with corporate greed and a quiet understanding of each other's hidden depths. Eleanor, sensing his empathy and intelligence, eventually revealed fragments of her true intentions, painting a picture of corporate malfeasance and a desperate need for justice. Adrian, recognizing the profound implications and the danger, agreed to help, not for monetary gain, but for the principle of it. He became her technical advisor, guiding her through the labyrinthine world of digital forensics and network vulnerabilities, helping her identify the subtle pressure points within Richard's systems. With Adrian's expert guidance, Eleanor orchestrated the next phase. She initiated a series of seemingly random, small-scale distributed denial-of-service attacks against peripheral, non-critical services linked to Richard's supply chain software. These attacks were not designed to cause widespread disruption, but rather to create systemic stress, to overload the legacy server's capacity without triggering immediate alarms. Each attack was carefully timed, mimicking the patterns of common, low-grade cyber threats. Richard's IT team, overwhelmed by the constant low-level noise, patched and repatched, unaware that they were merely treating symptoms, not the underlying cause. The first ripple effect of her plan began to impact Richard's finances in ways he couldn't immediately pinpoint. The analyst, influenced by Eleanor's earlier whispers, published a report highlighting the potential risks of single-vendor, proprietary supply chain software, particularly in companies with rapid expansion. This report, though not directly naming Richard's company, caused a subtle dip in investor confidence across the sector, prompting some of Richard's more cautious shareholders to question his technological infrastructure. Simultaneously, the minor glitches Eleanor had orchestrated led to small but accumulating production delays and inventory discrepancies. These were individually minor, easily dismissed as operational hiccups, but collectively, they began to chip away at profit margins and customer satisfaction. Richard, still blinded by his own hubris, attributed the increasing number of minor issues to industry fluctuations, or incompetent middle management. He raged at his executives, demanding greater efficiency, unaware that the quiet, almost invisible hand of his useless wife was systematically loosening the very foundations of his empire. The cracks were forming, slowly at first, barely perceptible, but deep within the structure of his seemingly impenetrable business. The first signs of decay had begun to manifest. The once solid edifice of his power was showing its initial vulnerabilities, an ominous testament to Eleanor's meticulous and silent campaign. Richard's frustration, initially a low simmer, began to boil over as his once smooth operations encountered an increasing barrage of unexpected challenges. He paced his opulent office, the vast city skyline a blur beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows, a stark contrast to the tightening knot in his stomach. The minor delays had escalated into more significant disruptions, impacting delivery schedules and, more critically, the quarterly financial projections. He barked orders into his phone, demanding explanations, blaming offshore teams, incompetent logistics, even fickle market forces. He saw the world conspiring against him, never once considering the quiet architect of his woes, the woman who shared his lavish home but not his trust. Eleanor, meanwhile, observed the growing disarray with a serene, almost detached satisfaction. Each email detailing a new hiccup, each hushed conversation she overheard from Richard's frequent, agitated phone calls was a testament to her meticulous planning. Her confidence, once a fragile seedling, now blossomed into an unyielding oak. The small, quiet victories fueled her resolve, reaffirming her belief in her own capabilities Richard had so callously dismissed for years. She felt a profound shift within herself, shedding the skin of the meek, overlooked wife and stepping into the formidable presence of a strategist. One evening, during one of Richard's rare appearances at their dinner table, the tension was palpable. He stabbed at his perfectly cooked steak, his eyes dark with irritation. "Another shipment delayed," he grumbled, more to himself than to her. "Some idiotic software bug in the legacy system. Costs are mounting. It's truly baffling, Eleanor, how simple things can become so complicated. You wouldn't understand, of course. Your world is so uncomplicated." His tone dripped with the familiar condescension, a casual cruelty that had once flayed her spirit. But this time, Eleanor did not flinch. She met his gaze, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips. "Perhaps," she began, her voice calm and steady, "the complexity isn't in the simple things, Richard, but in the systems themselves, especially those built on outdated foundations, stubbornly maintained to save a few pennies." Richard paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He blinked, genuinely surprised by her interjection, and by the unusual confidence in her tone. "And what would you know about outdated foundations, Eleanor?" he scoffed, though a flicker of something unreadable, a hint of unease, crossed his features. "Have you suddenly become an IT expert in your spare time, between shopping trips and charity luncheons?" Eleanor merely took a sip of her wine, savoring the moment. "I've always been interested in how things work, Richard. You just never bothered to notice." It was a subtle jab, delivered with precision, and for the first time, Richard seemed to sense a shift. Her usual quiet resignation was gone, replaced by an unnerving composure, a glint in her eye he couldn't quite decipher. He tried to dismiss it, to attribute it to her finally cracking under the pressure of his own frustrations, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Later that week, a crucial presentation for a major investor fell apart due to a catastrophic data loss within Richard's proprietary supply chain software. The system, under the cumulative stress Eleanor and Adrian had orchestrated, finally buckled. Critical inventory data vanished, disrupting the entire presentation and costing Richard a multi-million-dollar deal. In his fury, Richard called Adrian, the brilliant cybersecurity expert he had once fired, desperate for an immediate solution. He had swallowed his pride, acknowledging Adrian's reputation as a rare talent, even if a morally inconvenient one. Adrian, playing his part with flawless execution, feigned shock and commiseration. He arrived at Richard's office, a picture of professional concern, and began his investigation. Under the guise of diagnostics, Adrian subtly manipulated the system, making the core issues appear far more entrenched and complex than they actually were, cleverly obscuring Eleanor's fingerprints while amplifying the perceived vulnerability of Richard's legacy software. During a tense meeting with his executive team, Richard, desperate for answers, raged about the unforeseen vulnerabilities and the outdated architecture. Eleanor, present only because Richard demanded her attendance at all public-facing events, listened intently. When one of his senior engineers suggested a costly and time-consuming system overhaul, Richard threw his hands up in despair. "We don't have that kind of time. We're bleeding money." It was then that Eleanor, seemingly by chance, offered a solution. "Richard," she said, her voice cutting through the panic in the room, "I recall reading an article recently about a new AI-driven predictive analytics tool that specializes in identifying and mitigating supply chain disruptions in real time. It integrates seamlessly with existing infrastructure and can forecast potential failures before they occur." She paused, letting the information sink in. It was developed by a smaller firm, very innovative, and surprisingly cost-effective for its capabilities. I believe it was mentioned in a tech journal I was browsing. Richard stared at her, his jaw slightly agape. He had mocked her endless reading, her useless intellectual pursuits for years. Yet, here she was, offering a potential lifeline. His desperation outweighed his pride. "What's the name of this firm?" he demanded, his voice gruff but tinged with a desperate hope. Eleanor, with a practiced casualness, provided the name of a company Adrian had subtly recommended, a company known for its cutting-edge yet discreet solutions in data integrity and system resilience. It was a firm with strong ties to several of Eleanor's trustworthy contacts, a firm that, unbeknownst to Richard, was already prepared to implement a solution that would, in fact, be designed to further expose the flaws in his existing systems rather than truly fix them. This was the specific skill he had once ridiculed, her ability to absorb vast amounts of information, to connect disparate pieces of knowledge, to see patterns where others saw only noise. Now she was using it as a weapon, a Trojan horse disguised as salvation. Richard, in his scramble to contain the damage, grasped at the straw she offered. He immediately dispatched his team to investigate, completely oblivious that the woman he so casually dismissed as useless was not only aware of the source of his troubles, but was actively deepening them, meticulously weaving the threads of his downfall into an intricate tapestry of his own making. The tide was rising, and Richard, still flailing, remained blind to the true source of the storm. Richard's empire, once a seemingly impenetrable fortress of innovation and wealth, began to exhibit undeniable structural weaknesses. The unforeseen vulnerabilities Eleanor had so casually mentioned were now manifesting as significant public embarrassments. News reports, initially focusing on minor logistical hiccups, rapidly escalated into sensational headlines detailing catastrophic data breaches and unprecedented financial losses. The media, ever hungry for a scandal involving the rich and powerful, descended like vultures. Richard, accustomed to fawning praise and unquestioning deference, found himself under a harsh, unblinking spotlight. His carefully cultivated image as a visionary leader was rapidly eroding, replaced by that of a reckless, incompetent tyrant. He raged constantly, his office a maelstrom of shouted orders and hurled objects. He desperately tried to identify the source of these relentless attacks, convinced that a rival corporation or a disgruntled former employee was behind his misfortune. His security teams worked around the clock, chasing ghosts and red herrings, meticulously planted by Adrian and Eleanor's network. Each failed attempt to pinpoint the saboteur only deepened Richard's paranoia and fueled his increasingly erratic behavior. He saw enemies everywhere, scrutinizing his loyal executives, his longtime partners, even his own family. The pressure was immense, and Richard, who had always thrived on control, was rapidly losing his grip. Eleanor, meanwhile, moved with the quiet precision of a master chess player. She understood that a single, overwhelming blow was less effective than a series of strategically timed, irrefutable disclosures. Her network of trustworthy contacts, now fully activated, began to leak carefully curated documents to investigative journalists and regulatory bodies. These weren't mere accusations. They were meticulously documented evidence of Richard's unethical business practices, the very practices Eleanor had tirelessly catalogued. There were records of shell corporations used for tax evasion, illegal data harvesting schemes disguised as user agreements, and blatant disregard for environmental regulations in his overseas manufacturing facilities. Each leak was a surgical strike, designed to inflict maximum damage while appearing to be an isolated incident. The media storm, initially a tempest, quickly escalated into a hurricane. The public, already growing weary of the unchecked power of tech giants, devoured every new revelation. Richard's face, once synonymous with innovation, became a caricature of corporate greed and arrogance. His social media presence, once a carefully managed PR machine, was now a cesspool of outrage and condemnation. His sponsors began to pull out, his stock plummeted, and his board of directors, sensing the impending collapse, started to distance themselves. One particularly devastating leak involved a confidential memo detailing how Richard had deliberately suppressed a critical software patch that would have prevented a massive data breach, all to avoid a temporary dip in stock price. The human cost of this decision, the millions of users whose personal information was compromised, was laid bare for the world to see. This was the final straw. The Department of Justice announced a formal investigation, and the Securities and Exchange Commission launched its own probe into his company's financial dealings. The day the federal agents raided Richard's corporate headquarters, Eleanor was at home, watching the news unfold with a calm, almost detached air. She saw the flashing lights, the grim faces of the investigators, the stunned expressions of his employees. She felt no triumph, only a quiet sense of resolution. The golden cage was shattering, not just for Richard, but for her as well. Later that evening, the doorbell rang. It was Richard, his face ashen, his expensive suit disheveled. His eyes, usually alight with an arrogant spark, were now hollow and filled with a terrifying mixture of defeat and rage. He pushed past Eleanor, not waiting for an invitation, and stumbled into the living room, collapsing onto a velvet couch. "It was you, wasn't it?" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper, then rising to a roar. "All of it. The delays, the data loss, the leaks. You! My useless wife!" He stared at her, his expression contorted with a grotesque realization. "All those years, all those times I called you worthless, a decorative object. You were planning this, weren't you? Every single insult, every dismissal. You were just taking notes." Eleanor met his gaze, her posture regal, her voice steady. "You taught me well, Richard. You taught me that in your world, weakness is exploited and silence is consent. You taught me that the only way to be heard was to make enough noise that you couldn't ignore it." She walked slowly towards him, her eyes unwavering. "And yes, I was taking notes. I was listening. I was learning. While you were busy building your empire on a foundation of deceit, I was quietly dismantling it, brick by painstaking brick." The air crackled with the weight of years of unspoken resentment, of hidden pain, and of a meticulous, calculated revenge. Richard, for the first time, truly saw her. Not the meek, overlooked wife, but the formidable intellect he had so carelessly dismissed, the sharp mind he had so cruelly underestimated. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal, a complete unraveling of his perception of reality. The architect of his ruin had been living under his own roof, sharing his bed, sipping wine at his dinner table, all while weaving the threads of his methodical downfall. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stripping away every last vestige of his arrogance. He understood then, with sickening clarity, Eleanor's years of quiet suffering and the cold, unyielding precision of her vengeance. Richard's world, once a bastion of unshakable power and limitless resources, imploded with a deafening roar. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and brutal, a public spectacle that devoured his remaining dignity. Accusations of fraud, market manipulation, and gross negligence piled up, each one meticulously supported by the evidence Eleanor had so painstakingly gathered. His vast fortune, once thought impregnable, evaporated under the weight of fines, legal fees, and asset freezes. The empire he had built with such ruthless ambition crumbled around him, leaving nothing but scorched earth and the bitter taste of ruin. His reputation, once gilded, was now synonymous with corporate malfeasance and a cautionary tale of unchecked hubris. Richard, stripped bare of his wealth and influence, became a pariah, a living monument to his own spectacular downfall. Eleanor, conversely, moved through the maelstrom with an almost serene composure. The chaos surrounding Richard was merely the inevitable consequence of actions she had anticipated, meticulously planned for, and ultimately orchestrated. The years of quiet suffering, the countless slights, the dismissive remarks, all had forged an unyielding resolve within her. She felt no malice, no vengeful glee, only the quiet satisfaction of a complex equation finally balancing. Her focus remained sharp, her demeanor calm, even as the public eye, once dismissive, now fixated on her with a newfound, almost reverent curiosity. The narrative surrounding Eleanor shifted dramatically. No longer was she merely Richard's useless wife, a decorative accessory to a powerful man. The media, initially drawn to the scandal of a billionaire's fall, quickly pivoted to the astonishing revelation that his elegant, seemingly demure spouse had been the architect of his demise. She was portrayed as a silent mastermind, a woman who had endured years of belittlement, only to emerge as a strategic genius. Public opinion coalesced around her, transforming her into an unlikely symbol of resilience and quiet strength. Social media buzzed with praise, her name whispered with a mixture of awe and admiration. She received offers for interviews, book deals, and even speaking engagements, all of which she politely declined, preferring to maintain her dignified silence. Her actions spoke louder than any words she could utter. The emotional climax of this unfolding drama arrived not in a courtroom, but in the desolate grandeur of their former home. Richard, granted temporary access to retrieve personal effects, found Eleanor waiting for him in the vast, empty living room, the space now echoing with the ghosts of their fractured life. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot, reflecting a profound despair that had replaced his characteristic arrogance. He clutched a worn leather briefcase, his last remaining vestige of his former life. "Eleanor?" he croaked, his voice raw, devoid of its usual booming authority. He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the spot where he had once lounged, oblivious to her quiet machinations. "What have you done? What have you done to us?" His question wasn't accusatory, but a desperate, almost childlike plea for understanding. The fury was gone, replaced by a profound, chilling emptiness. Eleanor met his gaze, her posture unwavering, her eyes clear and steady. "I merely gave you what you sowed, Richard," she began, her voice soft, yet resonating with an undeniable power that filled the cavernous room. "For years, you cultivated a garden of contempt, of dismissal, of cruelty. You watered it with your arrogance and fertilized it with your disdain. And for years, I watched it grow. I watched as it choked out every last sprout of respect, every flicker of kindness, every shred of shared humanity between us." She took a slow step forward, the rustle of her simple dress the only sound. You built your empire on the backs of others, stepping on anyone who dared to question you, anyone you deemed useless. You believed wealth and power insulated you from consequence, that your brilliance justified your brutality. You mocked my intellect, my passions, my very existence, reducing me to a silent ornament, a gilded cage for your amusement. Her voice remained calm, but a steel thread ran through each word, sharper than any blade. But you underestimated the quiet observer, Richard. You failed to see that while you were busy conquering the world, I was learning its hidden pathways, deciphering its intricate codes. You taught me the value of patience, the power of meticulous planning, and the devastating impact of a well-placed truth. She paused, allowing her words to sink into the heavy silence. Every insult you hurled, every dismissive wave of your hand only sharpened my resolve. Every time you called me worthless, you fueled the fire that would eventually consume your false kingdom. Richard's shoulders slumped, his head bowed. He looked utterly broken, a shadow of the man who had once commanded rooms with a single glance. But why? Why this level of destruction? Couldn't you have just left? Taken half and disappeared? His voice was barely audible, a whimper of a man who had lost everything. Eleanor's gaze softened, a flicker of something akin to pity crossing her features, quickly replaced by a resolute firmness. Because, Richard, you needed to understand the true cost of your arrogance. You needed to feel the weight of what it meant to be stripped of agency, of dignity, of worth. I needed you to see that the useless wife you so casually dismissed possessed the very intelligence and resilience you believed were exclusively yours. She walked to the large bay window, looking out at the sprawling, manicured gardens, now a symbol of their shattered past. This wasn't about money, Richard. It was about reclaiming my identity, about proving that a woman's worth is not defined by the man she marries, nor by the contempt he heaps upon her. She turned back to face him, her eyes holding a profound, almost ancient wisdom. I am not your victim, Richard. I am the architect of my freedom. And in dismantling your empire, I have rebuilt myself. The air thrummed with the weight of her declaration, a final, unassailable truth. Richard, for the first time in his life, had no retort, no clever dismissal, no arrogant comeback. He was simply a man facing the ruins of his life, brought about by the woman he had so profoundly underestimated. The question now hung heavy in the air. What would become of Eleanor, the woman who had meticulously orchestrated such a monumental fall? Would she truly find the freedom she sought, or would the shadow of Richard's ruin forever cling to her new horizon? The answer remained elusive, shrouded in the uncertainty of a future she was now entirely free to shape. The fallout from Richard's collapse reverberated through the highest echelons of both business and society, a seismic event that reshaped perceptions and shattered illusions. His legal battles were protracted and messy, a public spectacle that laid bare the unethical dealings Eleanor had meticulously exposed. The financial ruin was absolute, his vast fortune dissolving under the weight of lawsuits, fines, and the sheer evaporation of investor confidence. He became a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and etched into the digital annals of corporate malfeasance. The man who had once commanded respect through fear and wealth was now left with nothing but his broken pride and the bitter taste of his own hubris. Eleanor, however, emerged from the wreckage not as a figure tainted by scandal, but as a phoenix rising from the ashes. She had orchestrated Richard's downfall with surgical precision, ensuring that while his empire crumbled, her own reputation remained untarnished. The legal proceedings confirmed the veracity of her claims, painting her as a courageous whistleblower rather than a vindictive spouse. The divorce settlement, though a mere fraction of Richard's former wealth, was substantial enough to secure her financial independence beyond anything she had previously known. It was not about the money, as she had told Richard, but the freedom it represented. With her newfound autonomy, Eleanor chose to step away from the public eye. The offers for interviews and celebrity status continued, but she politely declined them all. Her objective had never been fame, but liberation and justice. Instead, she quietly channeled her resources and her formidable intellect into pursuits that truly resonated with her. The useless social connections Richard had mocked became a powerful network for change. She established a foundation dedicated to empowering women who had faced similar dismissals and disempowerment, providing resources for education, entrepreneurship, and legal aid. It was a tangible manifestation of her belief that every individual possessed untapped potential, often stifled by external forces. Her days were now filled with purpose. She rediscovered her suppressed passions, particularly in the arts, a field Richard had always deemed frivolous. She began to patronize emerging artists, providing them with grants and exhibition spaces, fostering creativity that had long been denied to her. The sharp intellect that Richard had ridiculed found a new outlet in philanthropic strategy, meticulously planning initiatives that had genuine, measurable impact. She worked tirelessly, but with a profound sense of fulfillment, a stark contrast to the gilded cage that had once imprisoned her. One crisp autumn morning, Eleanor found herself standing on the balcony of a modest yet elegant brownstone she had purchased in a vibrant artistic district. The air was cool, carrying the scent of freshly brewed coffee and distant city sounds. In her hands, she held a delicate paintbrush, meticulously adding a stroke of cerulean to a canvas depicting a sunrise over an imagined landscape. The painting was vibrant, full of life and promise, a reflection of her inner world. She thought of Richard, not with anger, but with a detached sense of finality. His arrogance had been his undoing, and her quiet strength, her meticulous planning, had been her salvation. The journey had been arduous, fraught with emotional turmoil and strategic risks, but she had navigated it with unwavering resolve. She had proven that true power lay not in dominance or wealth, but in self-worth, resilience, and the courage to reclaim one's narrative. A gentle breeze stirred her hair, and she smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached her eyes. The golden cage was a distant memory, a chapter closed. Her new horizons stretched before her, boundless and bright, filled with the promise of self-discovery and meaningful contribution. She was no longer Richard's wife, nor merely a survivor. She was Eleanor, a woman who had meticulously rebuilt her life from the ground up, not just for herself, but as a beacon for others. Her story was a testament to the quiet power of a woman underestimated, a powerful reminder that true strength often lies hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the opportune moment to emerge and reshape the world. She dipped her brush into another color, adding a swirl of crimson to her canvas, painting her own vibrant future.